Joshua Marrache, who is from Gibraltar, indeed is in Gibraltar, and is really the expert on the Gibraltarian Jewish archives, of course, most of which are both unindexed and undigitized. We are really grateful that he can join us today. We mucked up our scheduling, and today is the fast of Tammuz, and Joshua is fasting, so we're very grateful he can join us. We thought that we would run today largely by question and answers because it's such a huge topic, and then if we have time at the end, we will throw everything open to the audience. Joshua, perhaps to start, you could just sort of set the scene and say sort of when and why the Jews originally came to settle in Gibraltar.
Good evening to everybody. To start with, first to start with my family. This is what started me off. We came over in 1758 to Gibraltar, and trying to trace my family, I sort of like trickled into the archives, had a whiff, and eventually thought, there's a lot of Jewish history here. So I did know about the Jewish archives, which Mesor Belilo, in actual fact, has done a wonderful job, including assisting Jose Maria Evacuations when he came over. So that I knew about. Then eventually I started working on the archives. So anything that there is in the archives, I actually took on and copied, let's put it that way. Trying to make it short, because as David quite rightly said, this is quite everything is a subject to be. It's a subject in itself. We have to make a point of, first of all, for you to getting a whiff, at least an understanding of how the genealogy of the Gibraltarians came to be and where they came from. We have to know more about the history. So it all starts with the War of Succession, when Archduke Charles of Austria has fights over Spain against the Duke of Marrache, Philip V. Philip V eventually becomes king of Spain, and Charles keeps Gibraltar. And that's making it very limited, because we can't go on to it. As I said, the whole thing would be a subject in itself. So we have Gibraltar. Little Gibraltar, in actual fact, is in 1704 captured and kept by the Anglo-Dutch fleet. During that time, we have two Spanish governors, which are appointed by the Prince of Hesse-Darmstadt. Eventually, in 1707, Queen Anne actually appoints Brigadier General George Eliot, who becomes the first British governor of Gibraltar. And Gibraltar created a free port. Now, it became a free port because the Jews of Morocco had put pressure on the emperor for him to actually give them facilities to supply Gibraltar with food and with building and construction goods and so on and so forth. With that point, the Emperor of Morocco put it on to the British that they had to make it a free port. So that this is one from them. Let's put it that way. That's to start with. So they have an established point by 1707. The Jews come to Gibraltar. So the first Jews that come to Gibraltar, money changes. We know that much to start with. Next up, we have, for example, another thing which occurs is when Colonel Bennett, chief engineer, actually makes a point. What sort of Jews were in Gibraltar? A substantial amount of them, but there were Barbary Jews, Leghorn Jews, and also from Portugal. So we have a set of Jews from different parts of, that is important to note. And we have the Treaty of Utrecht, 1713, Article 10, stipulate that no Jew or more should dwell in Gibraltar. under Philip V's point. So we come next to 1717, when the Spanish consul Francisco Garcia Caballero finds out there are 300 Jews in Gibraltar in 1717 against the Treaty of Utrecht 1713, with 300 Jews in town, with a synagogue in Calle de Juan de Sierra, which is Bomb House Lane today. Now, the oldest note that we found, which is brought in a case in 1713 between Mocata versus Acris, is a note of hand between Moses Mocata versus Abraham Acris and son. This was to do with the lace of silver, which Isaac Bassan of Lisbon, who eventually escaped from Portugal to Tangiers, to Tétouan, sorry, and he sends it to Acris in Gibraltar. Now, this note of hand is witnessed by Manuel Señor and Abraham Farisol. I've been able to trace the Farisols to Cavaillon when I went to the archives in Cavaillon. So that's the other one. 1717 again, the Jews are expelled from Gibraltar because this problem of going against the Treaty of Utrecht. 1718 December, Britain declares war on the Spaniards. So the supplies which were coming from Spain eventually were blocked. So the British had to go to Morocco and ask the emperor for supplies for Gibraltar. So the Emperor of Morocco widely said, if you accept the Jews in Gibraltar, as I accept the British in Morocco, then in that case, we have a deal. And that's why we're here now. So now there's an interesting point, 1722. Now this was Tom who sent it to me, which I thought was very interesting to note. And he sent me the libro de 1722, libro de Bucíos de Sinai. The interesting thing about it is we have 1720, we have Joseph Cohen of Gibraltar. We have Moses Fernandez Lao of Gibraltar. Joseph Cohen of Gibraltar, Moses Toledo of Gibraltar to Saleh. I'll expand on that. Abraham Mesquita of Gibraltar to Saleh. Moses Sananes, Gibraltar to Tétouan. Jacob Acris, Gibraltar to Saleh. Moses Toledano, Gibraltar. Samuel Cohen, Gibraltar. Moses Sananes, Gibraltar to Tétouan. Moses Toledano again, and these are different dates. And then we have Joseph Moses Arrobas of Gibraltar, and Joseph David Aboab from Gibraltar to Tétouan, and Aaron Ben Dimra in 1755 later on. So we have an extended amount of Jews. The point of Saleh was a port in the south of Morocco, where the merchants used to wait for the sub-Saharan caravans, and from there they used to exchange goods with the sub-Saharan caravans, say, for example, ostrich feathers, ivory, and especially gold dust from Mali. So we have an extended point of things that were going on right there. Now we have the first census in 1725. Now we have 111 males and 27 females. Now the 111 males were due to the fact that the emperor would not allow the wives and children use them as surety for males to return to Morocco. So the males were allowed to come to Gibraltar and deal, but were not allowed to bring their wives with them. Very few, as I said, very few, like in the case of 27 females who were wealthy enough, were able to buy themselves out. We go on to a census of 1730, which was actually, I've seen it, it's on the list of census of Gibraltar, and unfortunately it doesn't appear anywhere. So we know there was one in 1730. 1767, we have 783 Jews out of 2,710 no names. 1777, we have 863 Jews out of 3,210 with names, with ages and residency in Gibraltar. Now, we have 1784, 1776 out of 3,386. These were Jews, and they have their professions and only the heads of family and families. Then 1761, 661 Jews out of 2,874, which is the actual 1791 after the siege of Gibraltar. Now this one has both ages, time in Gibraltar, profession, so that's another one. The 1814 and the 1816 ones, I tried my very best, and I did score a few names. Let's put it that way. Then we have I worked with Gina Marks on the wills of Gibraltar. So that is.
Wait a moment, Joshua.
Yes, you got a point.
Can we go back to those censuses?
Right, we're going back to the census. Now, the census, we're going to start.
Wait a minute.
I'm
going to tell where people came from.
Yes. Now, I'm going to start with the 1777 one, which is because the previous ones, like in the case of, from 1767 onwards, we don't have any names. So we do have names in the 1777 one. So all the people who were in the actual previous census, obviously, the problem is that there was a void, an absolute void. Unfortunately, the Jewish community didn't keep the register or census per se of the community. They had other things to worry about. But the Catholic community, and they actually kept the records, so they were able to work through all this time, the 1760s and onwards. Now, coming back to what Tom said, in the 1777 one, to start with, which would date back to the others, we have, for example, the Ababs, who we have Isaac Abab, the famous Isaac Abab, 65 years old, from Tétouan, who had been residing in Gibraltar for 57 years. Hannah, his wife, 50 years. She was born in Gibraltar. Then we have Simcha Abab from Tétouan, his second wife, 15 years in Gibraltar. And we have, now I must list only the names. I can't go into each one. It's just to give you an idea. So we have the Anijar, we have the Azuelos, we have one set of Abu Rams, another set of Ababs. We have a set of Azuelos, Abenatar, Al-Maznini, Akris, Abudrams, Atia. We also have Lisar, Atabi, Azulai, again, Abudram, Akris, Abudram, again, Najar, Aluf, Abenatar, Azulai, Abekasis, Ambram, Abudrams again, Abekasis, Atias, Abekasis again, Asayol, Akris, Abejel, Amelal, Aburam, Abekasis, Abur Ben, we have the An-Nahori also, the Albo also, we have the Anelek also, the Bechik also, the Ben Amor, the Ben Susans also, the Levi Ben Susans also, the Benedis, the Barikas also, Ben Samaro, Ben Aros, Berero, Benetash, Ben Sadon, Barikas, again, as I said, Ben Paul, Ben Unam, Ben Adiv, Ben Amor, Ben Saken, and so on and so forth. The Beniders, obviously, pretty well known as they were. Two sets of Benider with Belilos also, the Benilos, Ben-Nimes, and so on and so forth. So we have a substantial amount of their name, the Conquis of the Holland and so on and so forth. The Messias Marrache, myself, my ancestors also. And the Senor also, we have the family of the Senor. In actual fact, the eldest lady in the census of the 77th census is Simcha Senor, who is 90 years old and has been 61 years in Gibraltar. That gives you an idea of how much or what sort of amount of movement there was in between during that time. Now, we have during those years, a moment, 1777, we pass on to commerce is fine, everything's going pretty well. We do have, as far as the community is concerned, we have two synagogues. The first synagogue, 1724, Shah Shamayim. Oh, do you want me to leave it to the
Joshua?
Yes.
I have a question about those censuses. Are they online? And can we
right, they aren't online. That's the thing. These censuses are not online. one thing that you can find the actual census if you will. If you please, you can actually either, I mean, I can go and check. This is where I can assist you as far as the archives are concerned. I am the one who finds or puts the sinews and muscles to the actual names, everything that's got to do with it, because I've done from 1730 to 1835, all the legal cases, also the permits, also all sorts of things they got up to professionally. So it's quite expanded the actual added to the actual census. Yes, you're right, Tom. The actual census, there are two census. One is the religious, the Jewish census, which are Mesobelilo is the caretaker of, and he has the census starting, as I said, well, pretty late on, because we have from beginning of the 19th century, when we start actually adding names. The other one is the Archives of Gibraltar, which is the one I've just mentioned. There's another one, 1777, which is the one I mentioned, 1791 also, and all the rest of the census, which are 1834, 1816, 1814, 1868 to 1871, 91, and they just brought out the 1921 in the Archives of Gibraltar. The other thing is that we have the Magistrates' Court records. Now that I've been able to delve into, and that starts, for example, we have births in 1848 and deaths in 1868. So we have that, and we have marriages also amongst the Jewish community, and also amongst the magistrate records also. There is another interesting thing. We have the Masonic record, because Jews started their own lodge in 1790, the Hiram Lodge, and it was started by Abraham Hassan, who was one of the, he was given a house by Eliot for having fought in the siege of Gibraltar, and he was marshal of the court, and he was actually the first, well, he initiated the lodge, the Masonic Lodge, where there were a mixture of people from all sorts of faiths, with contacts among most of them. And this could have brought together the feeling that they had amongst merchants in Gibraltar. You find in Gibraltar a very interesting thing. You find in streets, lanes, and alleyways, all names after merchants. And 5 of them are named after Jews. So there was some sort of understanding that made them feel very comfortable amongst themselves. And this is one of the points why. There's also the census in La Linea in Spain, the border town. So there's another census there. They've got documents over there also. Some have been disappeared during the Civil War, but there are some censuses over there. So that's as far as that's concerned. Anything else, Tom? Remind me if you could.
Yeah, we went through the censuses. Can you tell us when Jewish records began?
As I said, the beginning of the 19th century, we have, for example, I believe we got it down in the list. That's 1807. We have the births records. We have the list of circumcisions also by Gonkin originally. Ephraim Gonki actually also did the deaths records in 1828. So he started 1828. He was the one who actually started this and followed on. So that's when they actually start. Unfortunately, previous to that, we are in a little bit of a void. Now, you might have noticed in Jose Maria Becasis's books, this is why we have a C in front of the date, because it's circa whatever. And unfortunately, he doesn't have the surnames of the wives going back further a certain amount of time. So although he did a marvelous job as far as the whole setting is concerned, and he went to the archive, he went to magistrate course and so on and so forth, there were some things that were left out.
And when did marriage records begin?
Marriage records I have as in 1868. I've been told that there's a previous one to that, and that's where my colleague Mesobili will be helpful for sure, 100%. So
there are marriage records from before 1868, but they are not indexed yet.
I think the one 1868 must have also been part of what I also had from magistrate school records, also plus what I had from the other records. Yeah.
And death records, when do they start?
Well, death records 1828, as you've seen. One, there's a page in front, as you can see. They started in 1828 and they finished in 1850. Now, this gives us an interesting, well, it goes on to the cemetery, so I'll leave that for later on when we talk about the cemetery.
Yeah, the Jews were buried before 1828, so we will have.
Yes. I've come up. Look, I've just gone. Even I've done the actual cemetery itself, as I see now, and I can tell you the thing is that majority of the tombs are totally worn out. That's unfortunate because the ones you see now are limestone, stone. They're fine. The ones that were originally used were Roja shell. Now that's grit, that's stone grit, which actually went into a cleft in the southwestern side of Gibraltar, which became a quarry for the people who were burying. And they actually quarried from that place and then brought it to Gibraltar, to the actual cemetery, the old Jewsgate Cemetery. And I was able to see one of them intact, because what happened to the cemetery was in 1990, when I was clearing the whole thing, because we did a job amongst us, and we were awarded by Heritage an award for this. And I did the archaeology and so on and so forth, but it was a joint effort between all of us. Now, the thing was, as I said before, the grit, everything was covered in leaves. It was like a mantle. So then eventually I had to clear everything, assisted by some of the boys. And as you lifted the cover of leaves, you saw a beautiful carving on these brittle stones. But eventually they wore out. I mean, in no time, they wear out completely. So there are a lot of stones which state on that list that I came across, that I did, which I went tomb by tomb, which actually are unknown. There are names, but a lot are unknown. Now on this side, as you can see over here, you see on the sort of the triangular one, this is Esther Lara Cardoso, daughter Isaac Cardoso, daughter Isaac Lara. And she married Aaron Cardozo on this side, on the left-hand side. And on this side, it's Hebrew. And on the other side, it's Spanish. So this is interesting about this tomb. It's the only one.
Yeah.
So in that sort of shape. The center one, more to the right. The style, sort of like the sort of imagery and design on that side, as I mentioned, is originally volcanic stone bought from Tétouan. And the style of it, as you can see, is the same style they used in Tétouan, where in the area they call the Cemeteries de los Castellanos. Supposedly the Castilians used to use that sort of style of stone when they came over from Iberia.
This cemetery looks like it's positioned on a slope.
Yes, it is on a slope.
Why is that?
It's very difficult. Well, as I said, I have my thesis. Let's put it my point of view. I know that originally, when they were going to close the cemetery in 1848, the community went to the governor, who wasn't a very nice man. Let's put it that way. And they asked him if he could actually allow them to keep on burying. And he said no, he couldn't, because all the water that seeps through the tombs could actually affect the barracks, bring cholera or whatever. So he decided against it. But they said, look, we have a tomb that dates back to 1720. So The problem is that there is a written point by Lord Tiroli in 1756 to 1758, where he points out that he wants the civilians, the inhabitants, to bury on the north front of Gibraltar, that's closer to the Spanish lines. Now, the Jews, I was thinking, did not want to have their bodies desecrated if the Spaniards took the land, and asked for another plot, and they were given this. Now, this was 1756 to 1756 to 1758. Now, the problem is that the amount of tombs that you count now are 759. By the time they finished, I'm talking from 1828 to 1848, about 690 were already buried. So previous to that, from 1758 to 1848, let's see if you get my gist, very few people were buried. And I've come across just a few that are previous to 1828. And there's 1700s, you have about, I'd say 10. The majority of them are during the yellow fever epidemic, 1825, a lot of them. So there is a question whether it is previous to 1720 or 1758 to 1756, 1758, when we have a written point by Tiroli asking people to move because he wanted to have an ordnance warehouse on the Grand Parade where they used to bury previous.
Another cemetery, isn't there?
Well, there was this cemetery, as I said before, this cemetery, the Jews cemetery, the Jews Gate Cemetery. Previous to that, there was a cemetery, and we believe they used to use it, and that was the one. This is why Tiroli wanted to move them out from where the Grand Parade was, the cable car is, that area. And there is another one, which is a cemetery which used to be under the airport. Now, where the race course used to be, where the airport eventually went on, and there is a plaque which Messel takes care of, which which states that this place was originally a Jewish cemetery. Now, there's a point, because that could have been the place of burial because of the yellow fever epidemic. They noticed that the best way to keep away from the epidemic itself, they didn't know that it was a mosquito. So the best way to do, or to keep away from it, was either to go to North Front, where there was wind, or to the more to the southern side, next to Europe Point, where there was also wind. Whoever stayed in the town, obviously died because of the mosquito in the town.
And this new cemetery, is it still in use?
Yes, the new cemetery is started in 1848 when they closed the other cemetery in Jews Gate Cemetery.
How many tombstones are there, do you think?
Now you got me, because we've had a new plan. A new plan which was actually put together by Messod, and he actually he took some keen schoolboys to try to sift through the tombs and try to find the names. But I think this one is much larger than the other one. Now, this one, the interesting thing about this cemetery is that it has a path in between, dividing the women from the men. Now, I noticed that the same thing occurred in the Jews Gate Cemetery. The women are separated from the men. Now, this is something that doesn't happen anywhere else.
Is there an index to the graves that are here as well?
Which ones? Which one do you mean?
The new cemetery, has it been inventoried?
Yes.
Are the graves described?
And it also has names to each one of the tombs. Yeah.
And is it online?
Has it? Yeah. No.
So people have to ask you for information if they want to know.
Yes, if you like, I can ask, and I can ask Messel and work it from there and take it on. Yeah.
I think we've covered the censuses, the Jewish records, the cemeteries. We know that you have been doing a lot of work on extracting information from wills, land registry, legal
Yes.
records. What can you tell us about that?
Now, the first thing I found, as far as the wills were concerned, was by sheer curiosity. I just took one of the first volumes, 1730, and there I started finding things like the first names I started finding, I made a note of them. We have, for example, Joseph Ben Zaken versus Francisco and Diego Ramos Gonzalez. So we're talking about people who were originally crypto-Jewish name. We have Jacob de Castro. We also have, obviously, Isaac Espinosa, the Benatars of and Daninos also, the Núñez, the Faximas.
Where did you?
The Monson. I want to make a sort of listing of the actual names so you can have a better idea. We have Buzarros, we have the Monson Paul, we have the Aquis, the Anori, we have the Tepas also, we have the Moses Matos and Gutierrez, the Faizols, as I said, mentioned originally from again, Elias Tepas used to work with Samuel Louis Ben Susan, used to be the attorney for Solomon Elias Tepas of London. And they had a case against Isaac Ndemer. Joshua Cancino of Algiers also comes from Gibraltar. Joshua Cancino also against Isaac Neto of London. So we have a substantial amount of Mimon Toledano, Sactamano Salai, and so on and so forth. So all these, yes.
If I may ask, where do you find these wills?
The wills were in the archives. It took me absolutely years to write every single case, as you can imagine, between Jew and non-Jew. They're in the archives. And as I said, I did from 1730 to 1835 every single volume. So I have every single case. So it's a very extensive. It's like,
and how many wills did you find between?
Oh, I'm talking about the cases. The wills themselves. The wills. I was checking in actual fact with Gina. I think we must have hit about around 100. And the oldest one I think was 1770 something about Paul, but very few are the 1700s. We only have the majority are to the 1800s are majority of wills. The interesting thing we do have is in land and properties, which starts in 1820. That's when we have relatives. So we don't have just the normal names. We might have the Cancino, but we have the Pichotto. We have a lot of un-Gibraltarian names popping up all over the place. So the actual land property also, although it starts in 1820, brings in a lot of different people, which are very interesting in actual fact. They're very interesting indeed. But so, this one, I haven't hit the lamppost. I haven't hit it yet. Let's put it that way.
So Jews were allowed to own land, houses.
This is a good point, Tom. The thing was the following. The only people who were allowed to own property in Gibraltar were, first of all, British subjects, and they had to be Protestants. Now, because we had a group of corrupt governors, like Shrimpton, Hargrave, Clayton, a little bit sort of like onto Cotton, they were asked, the first three were asked to more or less to move off by the Secretary of State, because they actually were so corrupt that they used to sell the properties that were the empty properties of the Spaniards when they left Gibraltar. They were asked to leave. They sold the properties and they would pocket the money. So they would sell, exactly. I see your smile, David. The thing is, they would pocket the money And what used to happen was they used to sell it to the highest bidders. Obviously, the highest bidders were the Jews and the Genoese. They were the ones who would get it. So that's why the reason why they were totally corrupt. And this brought on a court of inquiry in 1749 to investigate this. And so the elders of Gibraltar, amongst them some Genoese and some Spaniards included, they had to witness that certain people did own the properties. This is a very interesting case of Manuel Diaz Arias, who's an Englishman, and he was kicked off Gibraltar in 1777, even though he was English. He was still told to, because he was Jew, he was told to go to Morocco. So the thing is, he was actually allowed by Queen Anne. He had a letter from Queen Anne to do commerce in Gibraltar. And he was a man, shall we say, the victualler, and also the man who used to pay regiments and so on and so forth. So we have people who had their houses. He bought his house, question, and other Jews bought their houses, but they weren't allowed to own until this court of inquiry, when Bland decided, you know what, you pay your dues for each one of the houses, okay? And any governor who comes successively will turn a blind eye. This went on until Aaron Cardoso in council eventually asked to have a property in Gibraltar, and he was successful and was able to build a house in John Matthew Square, which was where the auction square was. Previous to that, he had a house where Nelson stayed before the Battle of Trafalgar, and the famous words that he said, Cardoso, once I return, I'll get you out of this dark pit. He didn't like Gibraltar. He loved Malta. He didn't like Gibraltar.
Okay, there's this land registry. Are there maps that correspond to this land registry? I see numbers there.
Yes, yes.
And are there maps where you can look up where someone has?
Well, these aren't online. These aren't online at all. Now the thing is, if they do come online, if they intend to put them online, I'm not sure, but that's what there is for the moment, being on the actual land property. In actual fact, I found the actual plan of the actual land properties in the archives of Gibraltar, and I told the new archivist, and he didn't understand it, but I said, look, this is what it is. So suddenly he clicked.
Yeah.
So,
we talked about legal records.
yes,
what kind of legal records are these? There must be court cases, but there could be divorces, there could be family disputes or business disputes, or is it all of that together?
Yes, the first cases you see are very, very limited for some reason. There are a few lines and between so and so and so and so. There's not much written. But eventually, once you get into the 1840s and so on and so forth, you get more of a substance, and you get more commercial, more to do with, for example, commerce between Morocco, Gibraltar, and this sort of thing more than anything else. But you get, for example, the mention of Jews dealing with different countries, among them Spain, Portugal, so forth. As the Jews had to use non-Jewish brokers for Cadiz and for Lisbon, they would use these in the actual cases. You do find that the Jews use British brokers, and we mentioned Cadiz and a certain amount of wheat or whatever he wanted to import, export, or whatever. So that also appears in the actual. But there are some interesting ones. Domestic cases between husband and wives. They're a little bit comical, but it's interesting. There's also the ones about the occasional. Let me think. Also slavery. There was a very, very long case, which eventually also went to Parliament, is in Parliament, and also is they had to dress a Moroccan Jew in Turkish clothes for him to go to the Portuguese court to be accepted to at least to talk to the Portuguese monarch. So I don't know why, but they accepted Levant Jew, but they didn't accept the Moroccan Jew, and even so, we had the Inquisition. But there you have it.
So Gibraltar was a British possession, but it looks like they had a different law, because in England Jewish brokers were allowed, but not on Gibraltar. Are there more differences?
Sorry, what? I didn't quite get that, Sorry.
Gibraltar was an English possession.
Yes.
So I assume that they were governed by British law. But in London, we find Jewish brokers. And now you say in Gibraltar, there were no Jewish brokers.
We're talking about brokers who couldn't go to Cadiz or couldn't go to Lisbon. Otherwise they would. That's the thing. So they in the actual case, what they do is they bring up the gentleman. Maybe he didn't deal properly with him and didn't bring what he wanted, expected from Lisbon and Cadiz over to Gibraltar. So that's why. But the attorneys, they were allowed to act as attorneys for other people. And they were also, eventually we have the first Jewish attorney who came from Plymouth, Henry Joseph. And he was actually a commissioner for oath. And this was thanks to Charles III and Queen Charlotte. And he became a commissioner of both, and eventually an attorney, and also practiced law in Gibraltar. So he eventually is part of the Joseph family. He married into a Gibraltarian family, one of actually my family, so like Simcha Marrache. And they had a daughter, Rosa, which is very Joseph sort of thing. And he eventually acts in different cases as lawyers to different people who want to use his services. There is a moment when the Ashkenazim come over to Gibraltar during the Napoleonic War, more or less beginning of the 19th century. They come over to Gibraltar and they settle in Gibraltar, and they start using Henry Joseph as a lawyer.
What other sources are there? For example, are there newspapers? How important are they?
As far as the newspapers are concerned, the important thing about, first of all, the Gibraltar Chronicle. The Gibraltar Chronicle was vital because all the newspapers printed in Spain were basically writing against lies against the British, and very pro French and so on and so forth. Now, the thing was that when the Gibraltar Chronicle appeared, it started publishing the real thing in Spanish and in English. So the people who received the newspapers in Spain would know what the truth was in Egypt, and so on and so forth. So we have the Gibraltar Chronicle, whose first editor was a Frenchman who would translate everything that he thought fit to English or Spanish. And he was it's very interesting how he translates everything that he receives about the Jews in France to English. Now, it's interesting because at that time, we had the freedom of worship in France and so on and so forth. So what he does, he brings this forward, and you suddenly see a trickle of Gibraltarian Jews trickling over to France, especially Marseille. And we find Isaac Levy, who eventually became Rabbi Isaac Levy. And when you find him in Vayomer Yitzhak Ben Walid's book, he actually, in actual fact, went to Marseille, lived there, had 2 children there, and eventually returned to Gibraltar. So it's interesting that in that sort of way, this form of communication was so important as far as the Chronicle is concerned. Also, he was the first one to announce the death of Nelson, and the ship, it was a Chronicle in actual fact, that actually announced the Nelson the death of Nelson.
Yeah, are there family adverts in the...
Yeah, well, the thing about the Gibraltar Gazette, the Gibraltar Chronicle, is that we do have, it's mainly basically for the army. So we find that the very few cases you find that there are some points when the actual Jewish element is mentioned. For example, they mentioned that Aaron Cardozo and the Jewish community have passed some supplies to the guerrillas in Spain. That's in the Chronicle. That's in the Chronicle. It's also, there are also some adverts also. And the interesting about the Gibraltar Chronicle, it kept to basically military affairs. But there are later on, as I said, some pointing, some moments where it does point to civilians.
Does it still exist?
It still exists. It's published today. It's from 1801, published until now. Then there's the Calpense. You can see the Calpense newspaper now. There were 3 newspapers. There was the Anunciador, the Guardian, and the Calpense. The Anunciador eventually disappeared. The Guardian, a few copies are left. And the Calpense, I was able to keep intact because my father bought it from the Barral family. And it started printing in 1868. Now, it started 1868 very anti-administration, basically very against the flow of the British. So it starts writing, sort of like comes up with all sorts of letters against the administration and so on and so forth. Now we have all the copies except the 1870s. So 16 volumes are missing.
Yeah.
But the majority of 300 are still there. So we have from 1868 till 1960s, basically. Now, the interesting thing about this newspaper is that it does have all the information, I mean, up to date, the whole thing. You just don't have, for example, the weddings, for example, in Jose Maria Evacuations. This gives you the actual article of the wedding. So you see Jose Maria Evacuations, Mr. So-and-so married Mr. So-and-so. No, the Calpense would write about the wedding. And you have all the detail.
Yeah.
But this is not only with everything.
Evacuations, of course, is indispensable, I think.
Sorry.
But
yeah,
Evacuations,
definitely. Evacuations was an impressive, and gave us an impressive vision into everything, all the genealogy that we have. I mean, it's an important set of books to keep and to have, that's for sure.
I think it's a good starting point for further research, isn't it?
For sure, for sure. I mean, definitely, there's a lot to work with.
Okay. Are you available to do professional research?
I am. I mean, I've got plenty of time to go to the archives. I've got also majority of the things I have over here anyway at home. But also, if I need to go to the archives, I can. There are also other books. Like, for example, I have a book over here which I think I mentioned to you, which might be interesting to give you an idea. Which is also something from the 1870s and so on and so forth. It's like a list of people, what they looked like, their heights and so on and so forth, when they were from, people who actually were not natives, but were also their ages and the time they'd been living in Gibraltar and so on and so forth. They paid for their property, let's put it that way. So the actual, everything I have here at home and on my laptop.
Yes, I think that concludes it. We can go to questions.
Yes.
And there are a few questions in chat already. So there's one from Ainsley Henriquez, and he asks about a camp in Gibraltar where Gibraltar citizens went for their safety. And those camps were also populated by Jews from Gibraltar. Did all the Jews from Gibraltar leave the island?
Well, we have 2 points when the actual Jews of Gibraltar actually evacuated. They were told to leave, in actual fact. It's a good question, because the first time that we have to leave is during the Siege of Gibraltar. But we left the sea during the Siege of Gibraltar during 1781, when the actual synagogue, Shar Shamayim, and also Et Chaim, 1759, were totally destroyed. In May 1781, the Spaniards and French bombarded Gibraltar totally. It was totally in ruins. So the Jews left Gibraltar after losing the synagogue, and they went over to London, was through Portsmouth, over to Beesmarks, and some of the legal cases I'm mentioning, in actual fact, they bought their legal cases to Beesmarks if they could follow them up, and they weren't in favor of that. Let's put it that way. First time. Second time, the Jews actually had to leave Gibraltar. Jews and all the rest of the population was during the evacuation during the Second World War. So we had to go to Madeira, Jamaica, Tangiers, London, and Northern Ireland. So every single Gibraltarian had to leave Gibraltar because the troops were moving in, and then eventually we're going to build the airport, which eventually would help to move in and capture the north of Africa. And Eisenhower spent 2 months in the Rock of Gibraltar preparing that. Now, as far as the camps were concerned, during the Siege of Gibraltar, the Jews actually moved towards the south. And this is where they actually built huts. And so there was a camp, and they said in the actual camps, they could actually even listen to the floating batteries as they passed by and blowing their guns or whatever. They could hear the Spanish voices. And this is in Upton's history of Gibraltar also. So that's a good question. Yes.
David, you have questions?
Yes, so several. Eli says that he heard that at one point Jews in Gibraltar got taken to Tétouan for burial. Is that correct?
Well, it's an interesting point, the actual burial. Now, I've always thought that I've never known of if this is new for me, but it's interesting. As far as I'm concerned, as far as the Jews' Gate Cemetery is concerned, I believe that all Jews, when they die, they're buried next to a family.
Yeah.
So I believe that when the first Jews who came over to Gibraltar, the Moroccan Jews must have gone over to Morocco to be buried. I think that the few that were, the 10 that are there, that you can see that the actual dating goes to 1700s, maybe were just sporadic. I know the Bacchis, for example, were Italian, so they couldn't go. They obviously couldn't be buried in Italy, so they were buried there. But I think it's plausible that eventually that they did bury in Morocco, and then eventually in the 1805 epidemic, they were forced to bury the people in the Jews' Gate Cemetery, and that's when sons and daughters, so sons next to their fathers and daughters next to their mothers. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So they had something to follow by.
And quite a prosaic question: what language do Jews in Gibraltar use at home?
Very good question. I'll tell you to start with. This is a very important point, because the Jews have never spoken Ladino in Gibraltar.
Yeah.
We have spoken Castilian. Now, this is because we've been close to Spain in Morocco, and the influence from Tétouan Mogador, which is those Spanish speaking. And also I've found notes written in sort of like solitreo, like a Rashi script, written. And if you read it, it's Spanish. You read it's all in Spanish, which was very important, because if any Jewish trader needed to do any negotiation with anybody and his correspondence didn't have to be intervened, he wrote it in solitaire. He knew that the person who was going to receive it was a person who understood it. Nobody else.
Okay. And sorry, one more question. You mentioned a Manuel Diaz Arias.
Yes.
And the I think the 9th and 10th recorded marriages at Bevis Marks were two Diaz Arias brothers who actually married two Mendoza sisters, which is why I'm curious. Right. And I am aware that there was a Diaz Arias, New Christian Diaz Arias family in Cadiz. I don't know if that's the same family as the ones in London and the one in Gibraltar, but obviously the British were in Gibraltar whilst the Inquisition was still active. Do we have any information on people moving from Portugal to Gibraltar and then perhaps from there moving on to London or Amsterdam or wherever?
I think what Colonel Bennett said in 1712, that the Jews of Portugal had come to Gibraltar, is crystal clear. I mean, there were Jews coming from Portugal, as you might have noted in the tribunal list of tribunals of the Inquisition, Portuguese tribunal Inquisition. There are a lot of Jews that move eventually towards Morocco and so on and so forth, or even through Spain. The interesting thing about the Diaz Arias point is that one of the cases that I've seen and it's a very tricky, a very sticky one, Manuel Diaz Arias, in actual fact, had one of the officer's men came to pick up the money for the regiment, and Manuel Diaz Arias, or rather his nephew, Abraham Pereira, who was Gaspar Pereira, gave the man his money, and the man escaped to Spain. So this became a little bit of a tricky situation for Manuel Diaz Arias. But he was cleared. It was fine with him. Now we do have a connection between the Diaz Arias and also the first wife would be Jacob Cardoso Núñez. Also, that's another interesting point. So the Portuguese element does pop up. I mean, Jacob Diaz is Tito told me in actual fact, Tito Benedí is worthy to mention in actual fact, because I've learned a great deal from him. And he even told me that even Jacob Núñez Cardoso was circumcised at the age of 9 when he was here, when he came to Gibraltar. But people, I do suggest that people do read the books that Tito Benedí writes, because he's a wealth of information in actual fact. I mean, definitely important. And the first historian, another thing I have to make a point of, is Abraham Benjamin Surfety, who wrote The Jews Under British Rule. He was the first Jewish Gibraltarian to write the history of Gibraltar, or the Gibraltarians per se. So there's two giants there.
Okay, and if I can just mention a third giant, because she's with her with us. Gina Marks has done a lot of work with Definitely. You, and she's here today. But Bernard, you have a question?
Yeah, I actually have 3, if I may. But can I thank you first of all for the talk, and also for all the work that you are doing, and Gina for all the work that she's doing.
Indeed she has.
I am fascinated by the names, because there are so many of my family names just on the first list that you presented. People like Aboabs and Azulais and Atias and Conquis. And on that list, you showed them all as either being from Gibraltar or as having come in from Tétouan. Yes. But I'm interested to know how much migration there was from mainland Spain. But I'd like to go back, if I may, and ask, do you have information on Jews in Gibraltar during the period of Muslim rule?
Yes.
Or is anybody that.
There is.
And okay, and the other one is just a thing. You mentioned the name Abotbol as being the first of the, I think it was the burials.
The wills.
I'm just fascinated because I had a Moroccan brother-in-law called Abotbol, but I'm not aware of him having known of any family in Gibraltar. Sorry, I'll stop the questions there. Thank you.
Okay, so yes, we had, first of all, there was a redemption of captives during 1357, during the Moroccan, when the Moroccans were in Gibraltar. And there was certain number of Jews who actually were redeemed by the Jewish community during the time of the Arabs in Gibraltar. So that answers the question. So there was a presence. There's also the other thing, for example, that the Jews bought Gibraltar for a certain amount of time from the Duke of Medina Sidonia. You might have heard about that. I see you're nodding, so you must have known about that. Okay, from 1474 and so on and so forth. So we have so I think you know more about that. So there we have it. So for 2 years, they bought the Rock of Gibraltar.
There's another question in chat from Bob Kozowski. He asks about the 4 different synagogues, and they look like they represent different sub-communities within Gibraltar. Is that correct?
Well, it's not. It's a thing. Well, let's put it this way. You know that usually, if you don't like this synagogue, I pop into another one or build another one. So what happens is that we all went originally to the first synagogue, and that's 1724, and that's Shar Shamayim. Now, Shar Shamayim, we know that the Neto family, Isaac Neto, actually, in fact, bought the actual plot of land, piece of wasteland from, which was ceded by Governor Hargrave, and this became our center point. This became our center point where we used to go to. We had it, as I said, until it was destroyed in 1766, when a flood of water just wiped it off the map. And by it was rebuilt in 1781, as I said before. It was totally destroyed by bombing. In actual fact, Isaac Aboab, who had left Gibraltar and made himself, I just gone over to London, in actual fact, in his will, and in actual fact, Gina helped me out with this one also, we find that he actually sells bells and some of his scrolls for payment to rebuild the actual synagogue. So this is the important point about the first one. That's the Shar Shamayim synagogue. Shar Shamayim synagogue also has an interesting Sefer Torah, which dates back to, well, it's 400 years old in actual fact, and it was written by Rabbi Figo, and he was Rabbi of Venice in 1609. He wrote 3 different Sefer Torah, and one of them is in Shar Shamayim. Now, there is a great coincidence because David Neto, the father of Isaac Neto, was also born in Venice. So I'm playing with the idea that maybe David might have come through Gibraltar and left it in the actual synagogue. But let's leave it at that. That's Shar Shamayim. Move on to 1759. 1759, Etz Chaim. This synagogue, in actual fact, was right next to where the butchers used to have their stalls. They used to actually slaughter their animals next to the walls of Gibraltar, take whatever goodies were worthwhile selling, and the rest went over the wall into the sea. So what happened was the stalls used to have the meat and so on and so forth, and eventually they decided to have their own yeshiva, a place where they could study Torah, and then eventually became a synagogue. Eventually in 1759, it also became a synagogue. We pass on to Nefusot Yehuda. Now, Nefusot Yehuda, as I've mentioned, I've wrote about it it's by Century. I wrote a pamphlet about it. What happened to Nefusot Yehuda was the Shar Shamayim started to become a little bit too Moroccan in style. And the Nefsuddin, being more Dutch in their style, decided to build their own synagogue. So they took up an actual building which they bought from the Sakara family, and they paid $20,000 or something thereabout. And they built the synagogue with the gable, the Dutch gable, on the front. That's to say, we are Dutch outside and also inside. It's the only building in Gibraltar which has a Dutch gable on its outside. So they wanted to make a point of that. And their first rabbis for 83 years were the Conquis. So we have nearly to the 1880s, the Conqui families were the Hazanim of the synagogue. And one of the last one obviously passed away in Manchester. But that gives you an idea of what the actual synagogue was basically like also known as a Flemish synagogue. And the plaque outside proudly states Dutch merchants were the ones who actually used to worship in this synagogue. And also there's the Abu synagogue, which has just turned 200 years of age, was Solomon Abu-Ram, Rabbi Solomon Abu-Ram, who died during the yellow fever epidemic 1805. He had it as a yeshiva and eventually became a synagogue. So in the 1820s, when it was illegally to accept property and so on and so forth. So there's quite an array. The thing is that recently what we've done is we've had new books for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And every single synagogue has a different set of books. I think that says it all.
Thank you. Shall we've sort of gone over a little bit, so perhaps it's time to close. We're really grateful that you were able to talk to us on a fast day, fast of Tammuz, which of course is to do with the siege of Jerusalem, and
Right.
Gibraltar has been besieged several times, mercifully not successfully in the same way.
Don't worry, the thing is, I was able to do the mincha over at 4:45, so that I was. I've done the full shot. I still have to wait to finish the fast.
Yeah, I think you've got another 40 minutes till you can till you can eat. But no, thank you very much, because we were saying before, this is a really huge topic, one to which we will return. Ainsley was, of course, asking about the community in the Second World War. We just thought that to bring in the sort of late 19th and 20th century was too much for a single talk, because there was just so much.
Yes, a lot.
And we congratulate you for doing just so much much work on your own. To remind everybody that if they need any genealogy from Gibraltar, Joshua is a professional genealogist. If you didn't get a note of his email address, just contact Ton and me, and we're very happy to provide that. And Ton, do you want to just announce who we have next week to close?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Joshua.
Thank you, Tom.
And thank you to our viewers on YouTube, and thank you patrons who will make this all possible.
Indeed.
Next week we will have Marius Heemstra, a Dutchman, who will talk about the family Italianer from Amsterdam in Holland. And it will be a talk about a fascinating family which alternated between the Sephardic community and the Ashkenazic community, and were great merchants in tobacco. So I hope to see you all next week. And thanks once again. And see you.
Okay. Thank